There are moments that happen so fast, your brain doesn't even have time to process what it just saw. No build-up, no warning, no second where you think, this is about to go wrong. It just goes wrong. Hong Kong, 1972. A film set on the outskirts of Kowloon. Dust in the air, cameras everywhere, crew members rushing between setups. And in the middle of it all, two of the biggest names in the world, standing 3 feet apart. Bruce Lee and Steve McQueen. Now most people know the surface. They know Bruce Lee was a martial arts legend. They know Steve McQueen was Hollywood's king of cool. They know they trained together. They know they were friends. But what most people don't know is what happened between them on this particular afternoon. Because on this day, in front of nearly 40 crew members, Steve McQueen did something that no one, not one single person on that set, expected. He spat on Bruce Lee. Not accidentally, not as part of a scene, not in some private argument behind closed doors, in public, deliberately, with people watching. And the reason he did it is something almost nobody talks about. But before we get there, you need to understand something first. Because this moment didn't start on a film set in Kowloon. It started years earlier in a place most people would never connect to this story. Beech Grove, Indiana, 1930. A small Catholic hospital on the edge of town. A boy was born to a mother who didn't want him, and a father who had already disappeared. His name was Terrence Stephen McQueen, but the world would eventually know him as Steve. And from the very first day of his life, the world made one thing clear. You are on your own. His father, William McQueen, was a stunt pilot, the kind of man who loved the sky more than anything on the ground, including his son. He left before Steve could walk. His mother, Julia Ann Crawford, tried. But trying and succeeding are two different things. She moved constantly, man to man, city to city, leaving Steve with whoever would take him. An uncle in Missouri, a neighbor in Indiana, a stranger in California. By the time he was 9 years old, Steve McQueen had lived in more places than most people visit in a lifetime, and not one of them felt like home. Because home requires someone who stays. And no one ever did. By 12, he was running with gangs. By 14, he was stealing cars. And by 15, the state of California decided he was no longer a problem they could ignore. They sent him to the Boys' Republic, a reform school in Chino Hills, the kind of place where the doors lock from the outside and the rules don't ask for your opinion. Most kids who went in came out worse, harder, angrier, more broken than before. But something strange happened to Steve McQueen inside those walls. He didn't break further. He learned something. Not from the teachers, not from the system, from the silence. Because when you spend enough time with nothing, you start to understand what things are actually worth. He joined the Marines at 17, not because he believed in something, because he had nowhere else to go. And even there, he fought everything: authority, structure, orders. He went AWOL. He was caught. He spent 41 days in the brig. And yet, somehow, he came out the other side. Not fixed, not healed, but aimed. Like a bullet that finally found a direction. Hollywood discovered him in the late 1950s, and from the first frame he appeared in, people noticed something different. He didn't act like other actors. He didn't try to fill the screen with words. He filled it with presence. Quiet, controlled, dangerous. The Great Escape. Bullet. The Thomas Crown Affair. By the mid-1960s, Steve McQueen wasn't just a movie star. He was the highest-paid actor in the world. The King of Cool. A man who had come from nothing and built himself into everything. But here's what nobody told you about the King of Cool. The crown was heavy, and underneath it, The same broken kid from Indiana was still running, still fighting, still terrified that someone, somewhere, would take it all away. And then he met Bruce Lee. It was the early 1960s. Hollywood, a small martial arts studio where Bruce was teaching privately. McQueen walked in looking for an edge, something physical, something real, something that couldn't be faked on screen. And Bruce gave him exactly that. Private sessions, $250 an hour. The kind of money that said, this isn't just training, this is transformation. And for a while, it worked. Steve learned. Bruce taught. Two men from completely different worlds finding something in common through discipline, sweat, and mutual respect. But respect between powerful men is a fragile thing, because it only works when both men feel equal. And the moment one starts to rise faster than the other, respect turns into something else entirely. By 1971, Bruce Lee had returned to Hong Kong, and everything changed. The big boss shattered box office records across Asia. Fist of Fury made him a household name in countries that had never heard of him before. And suddenly, the man who Hollywood had ignored for years was becoming the most talked about star on the planet. Not in America. Not yet. But everywhere else. And Steve McQueen noticed, not publicly, not obviously, but in small ways that people close to him started to see. A comment here, a silence there, the way he changed the subject whenever Bruce's name came up in conversation. Because for the first time in Steve McQueen's career, someone was rising without his permission. Someone he had trained with. Someone he had looked down at across a mat while learning techniques he could barely execute. And that someone was now being called the biggest action star in the world. A title that Steve believed belonged to him. Now, here's what you need to understand about Steve McQueen. He didn't hate Bruce Lee. That would have been simpler. Hate is clean. Hate is honest. What Steve felt was something far more dangerous. Jealousy wrapped in admiration. Respect poisoned by ego. The kind of feeling that smiles at you in public and destroys you in private. Because Steve McQueen had spent his entire life fighting to matter. And the idea that someone could matter more, without his struggle, without his suffering, without his decades of clawing through Hollywood, that didn't just threaten his career, it threatened his identity. And then came the invitation. Early 1972. Bruce was filming a new project in Hong Kong. The details were kept quiet, but the energy around it was electric. People on the inside said this could be the one that crosses over, the one that breaks the Western market wide open. Bruce reached out to Steve personally. Come visit the set. See what we're building. It wasn't a business proposal. It was a gesture between two men who still called each other friends, at least on the surface. Steve agreed. But the man who boarded that plane to Hong Kong was not the same man who had once sat on Bruce Lee's studio floor, eager to learn. This Steve was threatened, restless, carrying years of quiet resentment that he had never spoken out loud. He arrived in Kowloon on a Tuesday. The air was thick, humid, heavy with the smell of street food and diesel. Crew members recognized him immediately. Whispers spread across the set like small fires. Steve McQueen is here, the king of cool. On Bruce Lee's territory, Bruce greeted him warmly. A handshake that turned into a half embrace. The kind of welcome that comes from genuine history. Not performance, not obligation. Real connection between two men who had once shared something honest. Bruce introduced him to the crew, showed him around the set, explained the vision for the project, and for the first few hours everything seemed fine, normal. Two old friends catching up under the Hong Kong sun. But Steve wasn't watching the set. He was watching Bruce, the way people moved around him, the way every head turned when he spoke. The way crew members didn't just follow his instructions, they anticipated them. Bruce Lee wasn't just the star of this production, he was the center of gravity. And everyone orbited around him like he was the sun. Steve saw it, felt it, and something inside him tightened. Not visibly, not yet, but it was there. A pressure building behind his eyes, a heat rising in his chest. Because everything Steve McQueen had spent 30 years earning, the authority, the respect, the unspoken power that comes with being the biggest name in any room, Bruce Lee had it naturally, without trying, without demanding, without even noticing. And then she arrived. A car pulled up near the edge of the set. Nothing unusual. People came and went all day. But when the door opened, Bruce's entire demeanor changed. His posture softened. His pace quickened. And for the first time that day, his focus left the production completely. Because stepping out of that car was Grace Ho, Bruce Lee's mother. She was 65 years old, small in frame but unmistakable in presence. A woman who had raised 5 children through war, displacement, and uncertainty. A woman who had watched her son leave Hong Kong as a teenager and return as a legend. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived more than most people could imagine. And when Bruce reached her, he didn't greet her like a star greeting a visitor. He greeted her like a son, arms open, head slightly bowed. A softness in his voice that nobody on that set had ever heard before. "Mama," he said. Just that. One word. And in that word, every wall came down. She touched his face gently, looked at him the way only a mother can. Not at what he had become, but at who he still was. Her boy, her 4th child. The one who used to dance cha-cha on rooftops in Kowloon. The one who fought in the streets before he ever fought on screen. Still hers. Always hers. Steve watched this from a distance, leaning against the equipment crate, arms crossed, face unreadable. But his eyes told a different story. Because what he was watching wasn't just a son greeting his mother, it was something he never had, something no amount of money, fame, or power could manufacture. A mother who showed up, a mother who stayed, a mother who touched your face and made the entire world disappear. And for a man who had been abandoned before he could form his first memory, that scene wasn't beautiful. It was unbearable. The next few hours moved slowly. Bruce brought Grace to the set, introduced her to the crew. She sat in a chair near the monitors watching her son work with quiet pride. And Bruce kept glancing at her between takes, making sure she was comfortable, bringing her water, adjusting the shade above her chair. Small things, invisible to most people, but not to Steve. And this is where it started to unravel. A scene was being rehearsed. Bruce and Steve were both on the set, standing near each other, discussing camera angles with the director. The conversation was normal, professional, until Steve made a comment. Quiet enough that only a few people heard it. "Must be nice," he said, nodding toward Grace. "Having someone who actually cares whether you live or die." Bruce turned to him. Not angry, confused. "What did you say?" Steve didn't repeat it. Instead, he smiled. That McQueen smile, the one that made audiences fall in love. But up close, in this moment, it carried something cold, something broken. And Bruce saw it. He saw what was underneath. Not arrogance, pain. The kind so old it had become personality. But before Bruce could respond, something happened that nobody saw coming. A confrontation had been building between a local crew member and an outsider on the edge of the set. An argument over access, over territory. It escalated fast, too fast. And suddenly, there was a gun, a revolver, chrome, catching the afternoon light like a mirror. And the man holding it wasn't pointing it at the crew member he had been arguing with. He was pointing it at the nearest person to him, Grace Ho Bruce's mother, sitting in her chair, unaware. Until the shadow fell over her and she looked up into the barrel of a loaded weapon held by a man she had never seen before. Bruce saw it before anyone else. Not because he was closer, not because he was faster, because his entire life had trained him to read danger the way most people read words. Instantly, automatically, without thinking, and in the fraction of a second between seeing the gun and understanding what it meant, something shifted inside him. Not rage, not panic, something deeper, something primal. The kind of clarity that only comes when the person you love most in this world is one trigger pull away from being gone forever. He didn't shout, he didn't run, he moved. The distance between Bruce and the gunman was roughly 12 feet. In combat terms, that's a lifetime. Enough space for a bullet to leave, travel, and arrive before a human body can cross half the gap. Every person on that set knew this. Every person understood that moving toward a loaded gun is not bravery. It's mathematics. And the math said, don't. But Bruce Lee didn't calculate. He decided. The first second. Bruce's body dropped low. Not a crouch, a launch position. His center of gravity shifted forward like a sprinter leaving the blocks. His eyes locked onto one thing, not the gun, the hand holding it. Because guns don't kill. Decisions kill. And Bruce was about to take that decision away. Second two, he covered 4 feet in a single explosive step, silent. The gunman hadn't even registered movement yet. His eyes were still on Grace. His finger still resting against the trigger. His brain still processing the chaos of his own argument. He had no idea what was coming. Second three. Bruce's left hand shot forward. A pak sao. A Wing Chun slap block that redirected the barrel away from his mother's head. The gun moved. Not much. 2 inches. But 2 inches was the difference between everything and nothing. Between a mother breathing and a mother gone. The gunman's wrist twisted under the force. His grip loosened for a fraction of a moment. Second 4. Bruce's right hand closed around the revolver, not grabbing, controlling. A precise lock on the cylinder that made firing mechanically impossible. His fingers didn't just hold the weapon, they made it useless. Second 5. A sharp upward strike with his left palm, direct to the gunman's chin. The man's head snapped back. His eyes went blank. Not unconscious, but disconnected. The kind of impact that separates the brain from the body for just long enough. Second 6. Bruce ripped the gun free, stepped back, and placed himself directly between his mother and the man who had just threatened her life. 6 seconds. 12 feet. One decision. The gunman stumbled backward, disoriented, his hands empty, his eyes searching for the weapon that was no longer there. He looked at Bruce and saw something that most people never want to see. A man who had every reason to destroy him and was choosing not to. Not out of weakness, out of control. The kind of control that is more terrifying than violence because it means the person standing in front of you has already decided your fate and is giving you one chance to accept it. Bruce didn't speak to him. He didn't need to. The gun in his hand said everything. The distance he had closed said everything. The fact that this man was still breathing said everything. And the gunman understood. The way an animal understands when it has wandered into the territory of something it cannot survive. He turned, he walked, he disappeared into the streets of Kowloon, and nobody followed him, because nobody needed to. Grace sat in her chair, trembling, not from the gun, from the aftermath, from the silence that follows the moment your life almost ended and didn't. Bruce knelt beside her. took her hands, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Because some things don't need words. A son's hands wrapped around his mother's shaking fingers. That is a language older than any spoken tongue. She looked at him, tears forming but not falling, and she whispered something in Cantonese that only he could hear. Something private, something sacred, something between a mother and the child she almost lost the chance to hold again. And then there was Steve. He had watched the entire thing, all 6 seconds. From the moment Bruce moved to the moment the gun was in his hand. And something broke inside Steve McQueen. Not his ego. Something deeper. The wall. The one he had been building since Indiana. Since his mother left. Since the reform school. Since every moment in his life that taught him, don't feel. Don't care. Don't let anyone see what's underneath. That wall cracked. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough. He walked toward Bruce slowly. No swagger, no performance, no king of cool. Just a man. A broken, complicated, brilliant, damaged man who had just witnessed something that his entire philosophy said was impossible. Someone risking everything not for fame, not for power, not for money, but for love. Steve stopped 3 feet from Bruce, and for a moment, the two men just looked at each other. No competition. No jealousy, no rivalry, just 2 human beings standing in the aftermath of something that had stripped away every mask they had ever worn. And then Steve did something that no one on that set ever forgot. He stepped closer to Bruce, close enough that their faces were barely a foot apart, and in front of 40 crew members, in front of Grace, in front of everyone. Steve McQueen spat. Not at Bruce. On the ground, right at his own feet. And then he spoke, his voice low, cracked, barely holding together. I've been spitting on everything good my whole life, he said. Every person who tried to love me, every hand that reached out. I spit on it because I didn't know what else to do with something I never had. He paused. His jaw tightened, his eyes wet but refusing to break. What you just did for your mother. I've never seen anything like it. Not in any movie, not in any fight, not anywhere. He looked at Grace, then back at Bruce. You had 6 seconds, and you didn't think about yourself for one of them. Bruce said nothing. He just listened, the way he always did, not waiting to respond, actually hearing. Steve continued. I came here to prove I was still bigger than you, still more important. Still the one people should be watching. He shook his head slowly. But I just watched you cross 12 feet with a loaded gun pointed at your mother's head. And I stood there, frozen, like every other person on this set. You moved. I didn't. And that's the difference. That's always been the difference. He extended his hand. Not a Hollywood handshake, not a power move, an open palm. The kind of gesture that costs a prideful man everything. Bruce took it, held it, and said one thing. You would have moved too, Steve, for the right person. You just haven't found her yet. That line broke something open in Steve McQueen that never fully closed again. They never made a movie together. The project never came to be. And 14 months later, Bruce Lee was gone. July 20th, 1973. 32 years old. A life that burned so bright it couldn't sustain itself. And when they carried his coffin through the streets of Seattle, Steve McQueen was there. Not as the king of cool, not as the biggest movie star in the world, as a pallbearer, shoulder under the weight of a man who had taught him more in 6 seconds than Hollywood had in 30 years. Because those 6 seconds didn't start when Bruce moved. They started when he decided that his mother's life mattered more than his own. And that decision is why this story still lives. Not the speed, not the skill, the love. Always the love.